Today I'm going to show you how to make homemade pie crust. I'm going to go through two different methods and you can decide which way you want to go. Here are the ingredients you're going to need. I will include a link below that will give you full nutrition information and more details as usual. So let's get started. Some make it look really simple and then yet you go to make your own pie crust and you end up having this mess where it just falls apart and flakes off on you and you get frustrated and throw it away. Well, let's go through two simple steps to make it easier. The first method is by hand. You just need a bowl and your ingredients. Let's start out by putting in 1.5 cups of flour, 226 grams, about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt or 1 gram, and then finally we're going to add in 1/2 cup of fat or 113 grams. Now this can be any kind of fat. You can use shortening, lard, butter, margarine, even oil, but you have to use a weighted measurement. Rub this between your fingers until you get a nice consistency. You want some piece sizes and you also want some breadcrumbs. And it doesn't have to be uniform, you just want it to be throughout the flour. You want it to look a lot like this. When you squeeze it together, it should somewhat hold its shape, but sometimes if you squeeze a lot together, more will fall apart. At this point, you can start adding in water, 1 to 3 tablespoons, 15 to 45 milliliters. Your goal is to gather this all up and for it to hold a good shape without falling apart easily. Now, if you are a beginner, I don't recommend using shortening or lard to start out with. Butter and margarine is a lot more forgiving for the first time pie maker, and as you get more experience, you can start using the lard and shortening. The reason why I say that is because it crumbles really easy and falls apart while you're trying to roll it out. And that's just the way that fat works. Now let's move on to the blender method or the food processor method. They're both the same. You're going to add in again 1.5 cups of flour or 226 grams. If you are not using salted butter or margarine, use a 1/4 teaspoon of salt or 1 gram. 1/2 cup of butter or margarine, which is 113 grams. If you notice, the ratio is 2 to 1. 2 parts flour, 1 part fat. We're going to put the blender on a pulse method and we are going to just pulse this about 20 to 30 seconds until we get a nice fine consistency of breadcrumbs, and I'll show you what it looks like in just a second. It will look very fine like this, and if you want, just give it a shake so it gets off the sides of the container. Now you're going to start adding in your water, 1 tablespoon at a time again, and you want to pulse this for 20 to 30 seconds or until you start seeing a dough type consistency just starting to form. Now I should point out, make sure if you're not using one that you take off the power source to unplug your power before you stick your hands in a blender. And it's always wise to remove the sharp parts before you go messing around with removing the dough. And we're just going to turn this out onto a clean work surface. It should stick together really nicely when you squeeze it and not fall apart. Okay, we're going to gather it up into a round disc shape. That just helps us roll it out later. And people will tell you you can't manhandle this and you have to use cold ingredients or you won't have a good, really nice flaky pie crust. That's actually incorrect. It's a myth. It's all about the ratios. As long as you have the fat to flour consistency, the 2 to 1, you're not going to have those problems. Just don't go start kneading this like you would be making bread dough and you are going to be perfectly fine. You can be pretty aggressive with this and still have a nice tender flaky pie crust. Okay, now that I have this into a nice round shape, I'm going to put it into a baggie and put it in the refrigerator just to chill down a little bit because the butter is starting to warm up in my hands. And if you are using margarine, you'd want to do the same. It just helps it roll out better as you go, because if you started to roll it out now, it would stick to your rolling pin quite a bit. I like to use a baggie. Some people use saran wrap, but what I like about baggies is you can wash them out and reuse them over and over again. As long as you don't put raw meat in them, I always throw out the raw meat ones. And say hi to everybody. He came to visit to see what's going on. And as you can see, I'm just pressing this down a little bit further, and all that does is just take out some of the time of rolling it out whenever I'm ready to use it. You can store this overnight in the fridge, or you can freeze it up to 3 months and then just thaw it out in the fridge the night before you want to use it. Sprinkle a good generous amount of flour on your work surface if this is the first time you've ever done it. Say hi to Luke. He decided to see what was going on, and now he's down in the corner there pouting because I didn't let him walk all over the flour. He has this thing that he loves to walk in flour. This is why I don't sell food for a living. Okay, now I'm going to sprinkle some flour on top of the pie crust dough and then some on my rolling pin. This just helps it not stick. You want to roll up and roll down like so, and then you're going to give it a turn just like this. And the turn just keeps it from sticking to the bottom of your countertop. And it also helps you keep a roundish shape. So roll up, roll down, give it a turn. And you just repeat this process until it's over. If you see some cracking forming on the edges, that just means your pie crust is a little too cold. Don't worry, you can squeeze them back together. People say you can't, they say you have to wait. It's not true. You can lift this up midway through and then just dust the countertop again and then roll up, roll down, turn it, roll up, roll down. You get the drift. Once you get it to the size you need, you can take a spatula and you can run under the edges to make sure it's not stuck to the countertop. And if you do what I just did and you tear the pie crust, just squeeze it back together. It's okay. It is a very forgiving pie crust. That's what I really like about this one. And then I'm just going to give it one more quick roll to try to make it more uniform. And as you see, it cracked. Just squeeze it together. You're gonna be all right. Don't get technical about this. Some people are really weird about their pie crust. Make sure this is big enough to fit in your pie pan, and then let's show you how you will put this onto your rolling pin. You can use your spatula to help you guide it, but if you do that, be prepared to crack it like I just did, and if you do, just press it back together and then continue rolling it up gently onto your rolling pin. And then you're going to grab your pie pan and you're going to set it down on the edge like so, and then gently start unrolling it and kind of let it fall into the center. You can lift it up and then just kind of let it gently glide in there using your knuckle. If you use your finger, you risk puncturing it with your fingernail, so that's why you use the knuckle part of your hand. And just press it into place as you lift it up into the pie crust. Once you get this all the way around and you feel it firmly seated in place, you're going to get yourself a knife. I actually like to use a butter knife for safety reasons because you're less likely to get cut on it. And you're going to cut off all this excess. If you see any parts that have split, you can always just press it back together at this point, like that. Okay, take the butter knife and then the edge that's not sharp, you just run it along the edge of your pie tin. And you're going to just guide it around until you get all the excess cut off. You can keep the excess for decorations, or you can freeze it until you get enough to make another pie shell. Now if you use your finger or your thumb and pinch it between your forefinger and your other thumb, you can get this nice little fluted edge. I will show it to you here, and you can practice it. If you don't understand how to do this, it took me many years to figure this out, and I still don't do it the prettiest. Just do yourself a favor, leave it as it is and go get a fork and just press down around the edges with the tines, and you'll have a pretty nice little looking pie crust shell. At this point, you want to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 degrees Celsius. Now, if you're not using a glass pan, I recommend chilling this to prevent shrinkage. But if you are using a glass pan, you have to be aware of something called thermal shock, where if you place a really cold item into a hot oven, you risk it breaking and shattering. So I don't recommend chilling if you have a glass pan, because not all glass is made the same as it used to be, and some of it actually tells you not to put it into the oven if it's cold. Now if you can find borosilicate glass, this is not an issue, and they still do make it, but it's super expensive and difficult to find. So my tip is just deal with the fact that it's going to be a little shrunken. No big deal, it's safer, and you don't have to worry about shattering pans. We are docking this now, and all that means is we're poking holes in the bottom, and this helps steam escape so you don't get weird bubbles at the bottom as it bakes. What I'm doing right now is something called par baking. You want to use either aluminum foil or you want to use some parchment paper like I'm using here, and then you want to weigh down the pie crust, and this also helps it stay in place and stay in shape as you par bake it. You don't want to use the rice or the beans, or you can find something called pie weights, which is specifically made for this, for food after you bake it, because it just doesn't work as well, and it's not even worth the few pennies that it costs to make this. Once you get it out of the oven after 10 to 15 minutes, you're going to remove the rice or the beans that you decided to make carefully because it's very warm, and then you're going to pop it back into the oven for another 5 to 10 minutes or until you get a nice lightly golden brown. And that is it for your pie crust. You can now go on and to make anything you want. What are you going to put in your pie crust? I'm making a pumpkin pie just because I had the ingredients on hand. And it turned out absolutely lovely. Look at how beautifully golden brown this is. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. Visit us at jacksonsjob.com for more. And as always, happy baking.